The scream came before any warning. A sharp, desperate sound cut through the humid forest air like a knife. Any animal that heard it stopped what it was doing. The birds took off together in a flurry. The monkeys clung tighter to the branches. Something was wrong, and everyone knew it, except the creature that had caused the problem. The hyena already had the cub in its mouth. Teo was only 4 months old, too small to understand danger, big enough to feel fear. His wide, black eyes reflected the sky, rushing past above him as the hyena ran, carrying his limp body between its stained teeth. He wasn't screaming anymore. He had stopped, and that silence was more frightening than any noise. Just a few minutes earlier, everything had been peaceful. Kessa, the mother, had gone away for less than 2 minutes to reach a higher branch with fresh leaves. It was the kind of thing she did every day without thinking. Teo would stay quiet, curled at the base of the tree, always waiting. But that day, something changed. The hyena, which must have stayed hidden in the dense vegetation long enough to study their routine, chose that exact moment. Kessa heard the thud. Then, silence. She descended at a speed few animals her size could manage. Her knuckles touched the ground, and she was already in motion, her eyes scanning every direction at once. Teo's scent was still there, faint, mixed with another smell she knew very well. A smell that made her clench her teeth. She saw the dust rising along the open path between the trees. Kessa didn't hesitate. What happened in the next few minutes inside that forest would be something the animals there would hardly forget. But before all of that unfolds, it's important to understand one thing. Kessa was not an ordinary gorilla. There was something about her, a story that few knew, that made this moment different from any other confrontation the jungle had ever witnessed. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments what you think and which city or country you're watching from. Kessa ran with everything she had. Her arms tore through the bushes with brute force, ripping branches that tried to block her advance. She wasn't thinking. She wasn't calculating. Her entire body was driven by one thing alone: the scent of her still-living son between that animal's teeth. The hyena was fast, faster than it looked. Bera, as the reserve guards called her, because of the scar that ran across her snout from one side to the other, was no ordinary predator. She was nearly 8 years old, at the peak of her strength, and had learned something most predators never do: patience. Bera didn't attack on impulse. She observed, waited, chose the right moment with an almost disturbing precision. No one in the reserve could explain how she always escaped. 3 times the guards had tried to track her after attacks. 3 times she vanished into the vegetation as if the forest swallowed her. There was something in the way she moved, always skirting the cameras, always choosing blind spots, that made the researchers uneasy. One of them even wrote in his notebook, "This animal has learned to study us." And now she ran with Teo, without looking back. The cub was motionless, not because he was dead, but because something instinctive made him stop struggling, as if his small body knew that any sudden movement would be his last. His tiny fingers still opened and closed slowly, searching for something that wasn't there. Bera crossed the tree line and entered an open area, a dry clearing that the late afternoon sun turned copper. There she slowed her pace, not because she was tired. She slowed because she felt safe. It was the first mistake she had made in her life. Kessa burst out of the forest like a shadow that had gained weight and rage. When Bera heard the impact of hands hitting the ground behind her, it was too late to recalculate. The gorilla was less than 12 meters away and showed no sign of slowing down. What Bera didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that Kessa had gone through something months earlier that had completely changed what she was capable of doing when her child was in danger. 3 months before that day, Kessa had lost a child, not to a predator, not to a disease. The first infant died because she couldn't get there in time. A small landslide, almost irrelevant given the size of the forest, but enough to separate the two for hours. When she found him, it was already too late. She stayed beside the body for 2 full days without moving, without eating, without sleeping. The reserve guards watched from a distance, not knowing what to do. It was Dr. Ines, the researcher who had been following the group for 6 years, who wrote in the report from that period, "Kessa is not just grieving. She's processing. And when gorillas like her process loss in this way, what emerges afterward is usually unrecognizable." At the time, no one really understood what she meant by that. They understood later. In the months that followed, before Teo was born, Kessa changed her habits in a way no one had seen before. She began to move through the area where she used to rest in different patterns each day. Never the same path, never the same time, as if she were deliberately scrambling any routine a predator might learn. She also stopped climbing high when Teo was on the ground. This detail seems small, but Dr. Ines marked it with a red circle in her notebook. Because female gorillas with young infants normally seek higher ground to gain a wide view, Kessa did the opposite. She stayed low, close, almost merged with the environment around her child, as if she knew that a wide view wasn't what protected. It was constant presence. But on that day, she had climbed, and that was what consumed her now as she ran. Not fear, not anger, but something much harder to carry. The knowledge that she had let her guard down a single time. One, and it was enough. Bera heard Kessa and tried to change direction in the clearing. Kessa anticipated the movement, not because she was faster, but because she had spent months, without knowing it, training for exactly this, reading the terrain, predicting the escape, cutting off the path before it existed. She wasn't just chasing the hyena. She was closing a trap. Bera dropped Teo onto the ground. It wasn't an act of mercy. It was pure calculation. The cub was slowing her escape, and the hyena chose her own survival without a second of hesitation. Teo hit the dry earth with a dull sound and rolled 2 meters before stopping, motionless, his breathing short and irregular. Kessa saw her son fall. Instinct screamed for her to stop, to run to him, to check if he was alive. But her eyes went to Bera, who was already changing direction, trying to reach the tree line to the left. And it was in that half second, in that impossible space between a mother's heart and a hunter's mind, that Kessa made the hardest decision of her life. She went after Bera first, not to kill, to make sure it would never happen again. She caught up to the hyena 4 meters from the vegetation. The impact was lateral, with her full shoulder, and knocked them both to the ground in a cloud of red dust. Bera reacted with her teeth, opening a shallow cut on Kessa's arm. The gorilla did not retreat. She grabbed the hyena by the neck with one hand and pressed down with a weight and firmness that left no doubt about what she was capable of doing. Bera stopped fighting. Not immediately. There were a few seconds of desperate resistance before her body gave in to the inevitable weight of Kessa over her. When the hyena finally went still, eyes wide and breathing broken, Kessa kept her there for a long moment, watching, as if she were engraving that animal's face into her memory. Then she let go. Bera didn't wait a second. She disappeared into the vegetation without looking back, and this time, there was something different in her escape. It wasn't the calculated, elegant exit of a predator in control. It was panic. Kessa turned around. Teo was in the same place where he had fallen, but now his fingers were moving, slowly, like someone waking from a heavy sleep and still not knowing where they are. Kessa reached him in 3 long strides, lowered her face until it almost touched him, and stayed there, feeling her son's breath against her own skin. Warm, alive, present. Only then did she allow her whole body to tremble. Dr. Ines arrived at the clearing 40 minutes later. She had heard the alarm of the other animals over the field radio and ran out with the team before even knowing what had happened. When the vegetation opened and she saw Kessa sitting in the center of the clearing with Teo in her lap, she stopped so abruptly that the assistant behind her almost collided with her back. No one said anything for a moment. Kessa didn't look at them. Her chin rested on the top of her son's head, her arms wrapped around his small body with a firmness that seemed to say, "Not this time." The cut on her arm had stopped bleeding on its own. The red dust still clung to her fur, mixed with the sweat from the effort. But what Dr. Ines recorded in her notebook that day was none of those physical details. It was the expression. There was no relief on Kessa's face, she wrote. There was something heavier than relief. It was the look of someone who understood, once and for all, the price of being alive. Teo remained under observation for 5 days. He had a bruise on his left rib and was dehydrated, but nothing that time and his mother's care couldn't resolve. By the afternoon of the 2nd day, he was already trying to hold onto Kessa's fingers. By the morning of the 4th, he was already pulling her fur with the stubbornness typical of healthy cubs. Kessa allowed it, without complaint. As for Bera, she was seen only once after that day, nearly 3 kilometers away, alone, moving toward the edge of the reserve. The trackers lost her signal 2 days later. Some on the team speculated that she had crossed into another territory. Others believed she had simply decided that that forest was no longer safe for her. No one disagreed with that second theory. What remained from that day was not the brutality of the attack, nor the violence of the confrontation. What remained was a simple image, a gorilla sitting on the red earth, holding her child, while the afternoon sun cast long shadows around them. No audience, no reward, only the silent weight of having arrived in time. Some stories don't need a grand ending. They only need truth. And this one was true from beginning to end, just like the love that made it possible. If you made it this far, leave in the comments what you thought of this story and which city or country you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps a lot to bring these stories to more people.